Welcome to the session titled From Algorithms to Actions. I'm very pleased to welcome our distinguished panelists as well, which include Anusha Dandapani, Chief Data and AI Services Officer, the UNICC, and Quentin Shu-Lambert, Office of the UN Secretary General's Tech Envoy, and finally also Yuping Chen, Head of Digital Partnerships and Engagement at the UNDP. And in this session, I'm aware we've been going for a while. It's been a great day today, but I think this is a really important conversation that we'll have. We'll explore the evolving role of AI within the United Nations and focusing particularly on two key dimensions, which are well represented by the panelists. First, we'll have a chance to look at how the UN is leveraging AI for global good. And at the same time, how the UN, through its work on adopting resolutions and broader frameworks, is also shaping the future of AI, and particularly AI governance. And it will also highlight specifically, and I hope this will be useful for our colleagues at Ministries of Foreign Affairs and Permanent Missions, how they and their staff can engage with and contribute to these trends and the important work to this end. So like I said, we'll look at how different UN agencies, and we have UNICC and the UNDP represented here, and the departments, so represented by the UN Secretariat, how they're utilizing AI and data science as a tool, as you said, for development, peacekeeping, humanitarian aid, and also in the climate action space. And our colleagues will share their real-world examples of concrete work that their offices are engaged in. And we'll also have a look at how AI has become an increasingly important topic for the UN's broader agenda. We're, after High Level Week, now entering the season of the committees at the UN, and there are a number this year of new UN resolutions being introduced in the General Assembly related to AI across various sectors, as it were, both in sort of the disarmament and the peace and security space, but also in the development and human rights space. And so looking back, and this is the backdrop to this conversation, in July 2023, the Security Council had its first formal meeting on AI at the initiative of the United Kingdom. And it's my hunch that we can expect more meetings on this topic in the near future, which of course is going to be very interesting for Denmark, where I work at the Danish mission as we're entering the Council in January 2025. And also, again, in the General Assembly that I referred to, it has so far adopted 2 resolutions specifically on AI this year, and they were both by consensus. And more recently, in High Level Week, just this past month, member states and at the highest level adopted the Global Digital Compact that I and colleagues also in this panel have been closely involved with. And so this is really guiding the UN strategic direction on AI at the moment. So I wish to welcome the panelists and have a number of questions that I hope can guide the discussion today. And if everyone is here, I'm seeing a black screen on my end. I would like to ask each of our panelists to introduce briefly how their institution is leveraging AI at the moment, as well as data science in various initiatives to implement their mandate, and also give very specific examples of concrete projects and also successful AI-driven solutions. Thank you. Perhaps we could start with Anusha.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, hi everybody. Good afternoon to folks who are dialed in. My name is Anusha Dandapani. I lead the data and the AI services that we support all the UN partner agencies with. And in this role, we support all our partner agencies all the way from the data value chain of bringing the data from different sort of sources that they want to harvest the data from, and also to serve different kind of needs within the organization, be it internal and external to the organization. So looking forward to a fantastic discussion today. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Anusha. And if we can also hear from Quentin, and then followed by Yuping.
A quick comment. Quentin said he will join a little bit later, so maybe Yuping, you pick up the question.
Sure, no problem. It's very great to be here, and it's nice to see a lot of friends, I think, in the both participants as well as fellow panelists as well. My name is Yu Ping. I come from the United Nations Development Program, which is the development wing of the UN system. We are present in over 170 countries and territories, supporting countries across the entire span of their development trajectory. So in terms of like advising on the health systems, education, infrastructure of the government, and so forth. On digital, we've actually been active quite a number of years now. We're present in 120 countries, supporting them in leveraging digital technologies to achieve the SDGs. So for us, digital and AI really is an extension of how we support countries in their nationally defined development priorities, and really looking at how we harness digital to really digitally transform and digitally develop those ecosystems and systems in the country itself. On AI specifically, we've actually been using AI for a number of years, where, for instance, we were an early explorer and advocate for the power and potential of, and the development imperative of AI. We were using AI back in 2020, our UNDP India office, to tackle air pollution, and we've been using it in our country offices for improving health, education, broader development outcomes such as, for instance, tackling misinformation, disinformation. We have also accelerator labs in our country offices that try to use AI in more emerging and like cutting edge ways to analyze Earth observation data from drones and satellites to detect crop diseases. We're doing this in Cameroon and Cabo Verde. There are areas where we're using AI to analyze accumulated waste. Guatemala, Serbia, Vietnam, for instance, are examples where we've pioneered this AI technology, and to generate land use and cover maps in Ecuador and India. We also have a number of global initiatives around AI for sustainable development. So looking forward to discussing that a little bit further. And I think that links very well to what Sarah was saying around the GDC and the global conversations around artificial intelligence at the United Nations, where we as the development wing of the UN are particularly focused on Global South and ensuring that there is fair representation in this AI revolution. Studies have shown, for instance, that by 2030, only 10% of the value generated by AI will be translated or felt by the global majority in the developing countries. So they are in serious danger of being left behind in this global AI revolution. And from the UNDP perspective, it's really important to focus on developing countries now to make sure that we have a sustainable and inclusive digital future, including AI for all. So I can talk to a number of the initiatives that we have here a little bit later. And just to give you a preview, for instance, the work that we're doing with the G7 Italian presidency, with our fellow UN agencies, UNESCO ITU, as well as just recently in Germany last week, where we were part of the conversation around the Hamburg Sustainability Conference. And we are now working with the BMZ colleagues on a Hamburg Declaration on responsible use of AI for the SDGs for next year's HSC in June of 25. So happy to go into some of the details on these initiatives a little bit later. And it's great to be here.
Thanks, Yuping, and great seeing you here as well. I want to just give Anusha also a chance to say a bit more about the unique work of the UNICC and maybe some concrete examples there. And then I think if you can also pick up, Anusha, on sort of the great segue in a way that Yuping offered us about how the UN is addressing the need, I would say, to have ethical security accountability concerns addressed around AI technologies as we start leveraging this new, or at least constantly evolving technology.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. To add on to what Yuping just mentioned, so our role as UNICC, we as a UN partner, we look at the several challenges our UN partner agencies face when it comes to data as a core competency in these organizations. Like most of our sort of services and the support that we offer to our partner agencies stems from these four sort of challenges that we do see. Only 30% of their data needs are actually met in today's instance. So where we see as the biggest challenge is where the clients don't often have their data that is being reused, or it's only perhaps a single purpose data only to start with. And they also have lack of adequate tools for data collection. And they also have a lack of cross-cutting data strategy and governance and uneven data management and also gaps in their data quality are the most common sort of problems that we do see with our UN partner agencies and on the UN-like partner agencies who we support and serve. And what we come from is the approach of us stems from the Secretary General's data strategy and the UN 2.0 principles, and now the latest, the governance of AI. But what we act with is focus more on why this matters to our UN partner agency is to start with a better data infrastructure and making sure that, like, when we are integrating these data for various diverse needs within the organization, we are following the best data management practices and making sure that we are accelerating the AI with the responsibility and transparency and explainability in mind. From our perspective, we have been working across multiple AI use cases. To cite an example for a few, is we have built out conversational AI interface, essentially an AI bot for knowledge repository, and also building out an artificial intelligence-based portal for especially focused on extracting information and intelligence from unstructured documents that are sort of the reports and the evaluation reports that gets published by our partner agencies. And we also see most of the use cases that we have tackled happens to be extracting intelligence and extracting information from unstructured data for all of our partner agencies' needs. But what we see is exploring these shared initiatives for our UN partner agencies, where we are able to identify and implement practical AI solution that benefits all the UN partner agencies. So we have a two-pronged approach. One is a shared initiative wherein we collaborate with our UN partner agencies, and we develop products which are AI products which are collaboratively developed with multiple UN agencies in mind. For example, instance, I can cite the use case that we have developed which was initially POC'd by UNHCR. This is a cross-organizational benchmarking tool for the HR policies across the UN organization. So this particular solution, this project that we built up all the way from POC to production, it kind of had multiple organizations use a similar solution in parallel. This kind of had the opportunity to not only to harness AI within the UN family, but it also gave us the opportunity to build out an expertise and resources in a collaborative environment where we have 13 partner agencies using the same solution across the board. So that kind of gave us the opportunity to create something collaboratively. And the second kind of use case that perhaps I can highlight is the opportunity for us to create solutions which are replicable, in the sense that one agency creates a solution that can be adapted by others at a lower cost. An example of that we have developed in collaboration with the evaluation office is something where we can extract intelligence from documents. So some of these use cases, what we are seeing is sort of not only based on the outcomes that we have also aligned with, but also aligned with the strategic framework of 2024 to 2030, and making sure that the portfolio of use cases that we are offering to our partner agencies is tailored to the UN standards and the framework and the strategies, and that's where the governance principles comes into play in what we create and what we deploy for our partner agencies. Hopefully that will help.
No, thank you, Anusha. That was a very rich description of your work. So I appreciate that. Yuping, since you offered to start talking a bit about ethical and responsible AI, would you please share also how UNDP is thinking about ensuring that AI is sort of indeed ethically used, developed, and so on, and also indeed addressing the concerns. You did address, I think, some of the issues around inequality, but other aspects of AI ethics and AI security and accountability.
So this is kind of an interesting question, right? Like, what is the role of the UN in determining how countries should decide on the technological use? And we as the development agency are not really that involved, and I think Quentin will speak a little bit more to this, around the global normative discussions, where what we bring to the conversation is the perspectives of our program country partners, where we look at what the ask is from the ground and what countries are telling us in terms of what is the support that is needed from the UN in terms of development outcomes that we want to achieve. And the way we approach it is to say that your use of technology needs to be responsible, ethical, and sustainable, because that's the need in the longer run to make sure that you take a citizen-centric approach, a rights-based inclusive approach to digital technologies. And what we do is we aim to build the capacity in these countries to be able to make these types of choices, recognizing that in order to be successful and efficient and sustainable in the long run, it is best to make these types of choices in digital transformation and digital development upfront. So a lot of our work has to do with setting the right sort of landscape in the country. So that's why, for instance, we are now in 50 to 60 countries doing digital readiness assessments, and in about 8 to 10 countries also doing artificial intelligence landscape assessments. Also, this is part of the partnership with UNESCO around their RAM methodology, where they're looking at having that as part of the ethical impact assessments they do as well, where we're really looking to inform a national government as to what is needed in their policymaking system, their ecosystem, their government system, to make these types of informed digital transformation choices. And so that's part of making sure that as their national strategies around digital or AI or even cybersecurity takes shape, it really is informed by these considerations around being citizen-centric, rights-based, inclusive, and sustainable in the long run itself. So that's how we approach sort of policy making as a whole in our partner countries, and supporting them in formulating these types of national strategies for development, and then building the capacity in policymakers to make these types of choices as well. What is also, I think, particularly important is to recognize that in developing countries, before we even get to AI and responsible, sustainable, ethical use of AI, you have to talk about things such as data, which is the means by which you actually have to have data governance to then allow for ethical and responsible AI. And then even before a conversation around data, there's also this question around basic infrastructure, right, of digital itself. In some countries, connectivity is a challenge. And then in many countries, even before that, regular energy is a challenge. So how do you actually build in these types of conversations around responsible, ethical AI, which is really the end of the chain, where there is actually much more conversations that has to be had in developing countries to achieve that responsible and ethical AI that we want to get. So as part of UNDP, when we talk to our partner countries, we're really looking at the entire value chain of development, right? Not just the outcome, which is the ethical, sustainable AI that we want, but how do you embed that in all the parts of that development transformation journey? And that's where I think we approach that conversation around AI itself. I mentioned, for instance, some of the work that we're doing around AI startups and local languages. So I'll put a couple of examples in the chat. This is the work that we're doing with the Italian G7 presidency, where we're looking at actually enabling local AI ecosystems to have this same kind of consideration around data governance, responsible use, industry, and people-centered approaches, where we're looking at linking up sort of AI startups in Africa with more mentorship opportunities, also looking at the question of local languages, where, again, to populate the AI algorithms, we also need representative data that also pulls from local languages and is responding to the challenges in a country itself. So a lot of these questions have to start from quite strong development foundations around connectivity, ICT use, cybersecurity, data governance, before we even get to the point of secure and responsible AI. So that's some of the work we've been doing. I also want to, again, give a flag out to what we're working with the BMZ on, where we're aiming to actually achieve principles on the responsible use of AI for the SDGs and really embedding that in the development context. I think a lot of the colleagues around the table here are foreign policy experts who actually are looking at development, and for whom AI is actually more of a new area that is really coming into this sort of peace and security development space. And what we want to do as UNDP is also leverage this momentum to think about what AI means for its application in development spaces as well, right? So when you intersect, for instance, AI with sustainability, environmental issues, climate impacts, what do we need to do to ensure that AI is deployed in a sustainable manner? What are the commitments that the climate community or conversations that the climate community needs to have with AI or technology practitioners to make sure that as we use AI, it really is done with all these different types of communities in mind? So for instance, around issues such as gender, indigenous communities, representation, what are these intersections that we need to have between these existing communities of action in the UN with the technology space, such that we can really reach a comprehensive approach to AI that is ethical and responsible.
Thanks, Yuping. And again, thanks for giving us a few segues here for great discussion. I wanted to bring us back to also, because you mentioned the full value chain, the importance of connectivity, and I know this is something that you've also worked on for a while now, thinking about the Global Digital Compact, which was just adopted during high-level week, so just last month. And I'd love to hear a bit more about how each of you and your agencies see the Global Digital Compact and its adoption by consensus, shaping the strategic direction of your work going forward. But also, what implications, if you can speak to that, I know this is perhaps more to Quentin, but sort of implications for the future of AI governance and what this new document and this new consensus, as it were, means for the work that you're doing. Anusha, do you want to take off?
I want to let Yuping take off first, and then I can follow.
I guess Quentin's not here to answer that. I think colleagues would know that at the recent Summit of the Future, the Global Digital Compact was adopted by member states, where it contains a lot of provisions around how member states and the international community should approach global digital cooperation, of which AI, I think, is the governance of AI is one specific segment, but then really it also has commitments around other key areas of work as well. So around narrowing global digital divides, connectivity, digital rights, and so forth. So I think that will be actually quite critical in how the conversation continues in the global space. I will say that as UNDP, we'll quite focus on ensuring that Global Digital Compact actually lands in actual in-country changes and implementation. So for us, really, it's about how do we translate, again, returning to what I started with, right? We're really informed by what our program countries want and need. And then for us, how do you then translate these ideals or commitments in the GDC into actual impact for these countries? So the number one ask we hear from our program countries is capacity building. So all these lofty ambitions that are concluded in Global Digital Compact, what does it mean if you don't have the capacity or resources within a program country to be able to carry it out? And what support is going to come from the global level to developing countries to ensure that they have the ability to meet these commitments and targets that have been set out in the GDC? And that's where we're looking to scale a lot of the work we as UNDP are doing in the capacity building space, where we're going to be rolling out quite a big number of foundational capacity building programs for our partner countries. On the area of AI specifically, we're also looking at what we are informally sort of calling an AI commitment of sorts. How do we look at the areas of work that UNDP is doing, the AI hub that I mentioned, the HSC work that I mentioned, as well as some of the things that we're rolling out in environmental sustainability, AI landscape assessments, AI strategy development for countries in a comprehensive effort to lift the global south and make sure they're fully part of the AI revolution, really targeting developing countries and making sure that they're fully represented, fully engaged, and fully empowered to be part of what the GDC is calling, AI for the greater good and so forth.
Thanks, Yuping. Anusha, over to you.
Yeah, to add on to what Yuping just mentioned, right? We are at UNICC still digesting what has been prescribed in the Global Digital Compact. From our perspective, how are we contributing to the UN partner agencies and the programs and the support organizations like UNDP or UNHCR they offer, is to make sure that we are assessing their maturity when it comes to data and the AI capabilities, and making sure that these things doesn't come overnight, but in stages, right? There are sort of things that we can support from a systematic stage perspective, and then also from a differentiating stage perspective, where we can bring in the capacity when it comes to making sure that the better services that we offer for data and AI is driving the data value chain, but also making sure that we have the lens of better understanding of how the UN context works and why we are able to sort of build something for their better management, and also bringing in the security and the AI sort of capacity to the table, not only to meet everyone who needs it, but also when they need it and where they need it, and making sure that the greater access to what we serve is what we are currently focused on. And we do see that, like, not all our partner agencies or all our clients who we support and serve with are not in the same level of maturity for them to adapt to AI. So it is a roadmap that we are looking to collaboratively build with not only with our UN partner agencies, and also with our UN-like partners who we work with.
Thank you, Anusha, also for leading us to the question around, coordination at the UN level, but also sort of collaboration with partners outside. And of course, in these recent negotiations, there's been a strong push for more multi-stakeholder engagement. So I would love to hear a bit more from both of you about both sort of the challenges and the achievements that you've seen in the space of UN coordination across a number. You talked about intersectionality and how this relates to the sustainability agenda, but also climate agenda, gender agenda, and so on. And also how you have been able to work successfully and maybe with more challenges with other stakeholders outside of the UN. Maybe I'll hand over to you, Yuping.
So I think some colleagues will be familiar with me from some of the work that I did in previous iterations of my job, where I have actually always been very focused on multi-stakeholder engagement. From the UNDP side, we actually are quite committed to making sure that we have stakeholder partners as part of the conversation on how we develop our programming in the digital space. So for instance, with the AI for Sustainable Development Hub that I mentioned that we launched as part of the G7 Italy presidency, we actually had consulted a lot of African stakeholders around what they thought would be the best and most useful form of this type of work. And so, for instance, as part of that, we will be bringing African startups with us in Silicon Valley to really connect them with Northern industry and sort of the tech giants to really think about what kind of mentorship and opportunities lie in that space. And so like a lot of our country work is always very informed by this idea of what is most useful to local ecosystems, not just national governments, of course, that being our primary interlocutor, but also making sure that there is that connection to what communities and individuals, small and medium enterprises, local ecosystems really do need. So I do think for us that multi-stakeholder engagement is critical to inform impactful, long-term, and sustainable work for UNDP. We have a joke that says basically like we need repeat customers, right? If countries don't trust us and see the results that we can translate for them, they're not going to come back to UNDP and really see us as a trusted partner for government. So for us, multi-stakeholder really is at the core of what we do. In terms of more sort of global engagements, we do think that it's important to inform again the global work by that conversation with stakeholders as well. And that's why, for instance, UNDP is a proud co-convener with fellow UN agencies, ITU, UNCTAD, and UNESCO around the WSIS Forum, where this is a multi-stakeholder forum that really is looking at how digital can be done in a little bit more of a broader, open way that's involving all these different communities. We're also quite active in the IGF and a lot of these other multi-stakeholder places where the conversation goes on. What we have been seeing, I think, and this is the trend that we've been sort of trying to push through our engagements in all these global types of processes, is that not just the multi-stakeholder tech digital community needs to be engaged in the UN conversations. What we need to also do is bring in the multi-stakeholder climate community, the multi-stakeholder gender community, the multi-stakeholder human rights community into these types of conversations as well. Because a lot of times when we say multi-stakeholder in this digital tech space, we are referring to sort of the internet governance community, the MAG community, the IGF community, which is great and extremely active, but we need to also then infuse the same amount of activism into the civil society communities that exist in the other spaces of the UN and bring everybody together in that type of collective conversation. And that's a little bit what we're also aiming to do via the Hamburg Sustainability Conference conversation that I mentioned before. What we really are trying to animate the sectors of climate, perhaps around gender, indigenous communities into this conversation around digital as well. So I think for member states thinking in New York, where you see a lot of these different types of civil society or multi-stakeholder groups, how can we bring them together closer with this technical, digital governance, internet governance community? And how do we have these types of conversations a little bit better?
Thanks, Yuping. And I wonder if I can just have you answer a follow-on question, since you're entering into this a bit. As you said, this is a concern for many actors. Member states, at least the majority, have stressed the importance of multi-stakeholder engagement. Could you say a bit? I mean, there are also apparent challenges to this. So if you could say a bit about what type of challenges you've encountered and what strategies have been successful in bridging them. I feel like you said a bit implicitly, but if there are any concrete recommendations that you could share.
UNDP does believe in the value of the WSIS forum and some of these conversations that have gone on. And I think what is important is to learn from the best practices that have engaged that have emerged, for instance, in Geneva around the WSIS forum, around some of the multi-stakeholder engagements there, and some of the process, for instance, at the ITU, where the private sector is part of the sector organizations, some of the models that have developed around multi-stakeholder engagement, not necessarily just in the digital space, but other places as well, and make sure that us here in New York also have that kind of inclination. I think, very candidly speaking, that in the Global Digital Compact, there were challenges in this process. And I do think that going forward in its implementation, it is important to address those and really make sure that there are institutional ways where the multi-stakeholder community can contribute, and to also reaffirm the importance of the WSIS process, which is at its heart multi-stakeholder, and have that as part of the coming together of all these digital conversations in New York. So I do think it's important to recognize the value of what has happened, what has continues to be worked on, and make sure that those are part of GDC follow-up going forward. I will also say this, I think that a lot of the colleagues in the room were involved in a lot of the conversations over the past year, and it's important to recognize where there are strengths in the various parts of the UN system to do work and to strengthen those parts, because I do think that we have a little bit of a fear of perhaps maybe reinventing the wheel sometimes, as opposed to looking to what can be strengthened and bolstered and expanded on. And there have been very good, I think, projects, processes, and forums that have been, that need additional resources and can be built on as part of GDC implementation. The multi-stakeholder example, of course, and recognizing the GDC, is the Internet Governance Forum, where I do think there is a critical need to provide them with more resources and think about how we can further expand that community's role and that forum's role in terms of informing global discussions at the UN.
Thank you so much. And indeed, I'm aware that these conversations are being had as part of the follow-up to the adoption of the pact and the GDC. So that's going to be very interesting to follow. Also with the WSIS review coming up, member states and multi-stakeholders alike will be engaging closely in that. I'll hand over to Anusha, and then I hope our conveners will let us know when Quentin joins. As Yuping indicated, there's a lot of these questions that are very relevant to the Tech Envoy's office. But Anusha, if you want to talk a bit about UN internal coordination and also engagement with the multi-stakeholder community in its broadest definition.
Thank you. For me, the perspective that we can share from UNICC is from the operational use of AI within the UN system, right? So for us, it is more around how can we consolidate, standardize, and centralize all the efforts that we are taking stock of all the AI projects in the UN system, and making sure that we are including and cataloging them and publicizing them for the benefit of the internal and the external knowledge sharing perspective. And also we see that from our perspective, developing a common risk assessment framework for the use of AI within the system, because sharing a guidance on common risks and mitigations, as well as the baseline of these assessments of these common AI products and services that we are offering, that kind of goes beyond the UN organization itself, right? Beyond the specific mandates also, that can help us develop this kind of shareable building blocks, if you may, beyond the UN system, but also actively to contribute to AI-related work that we will do across the system, and further develop it based on the inputs that we can get from these kind of stakeholder forums and multi-stakeholder forums that will give us this common consolidated approach that we can develop. And that has been our focus, and that has been the sort of frameworks that we are trying to build around the model policy. And also the responsible use of AI within the UN system happens to be our priority throughout. And perhaps I will leave the discussion out here and share it with Quentin, who has just joined.
Thank you, Anusha, and indeed welcome to Quentin. We've covered a bit of territory, so if you don't mind, I'll ask you a few questions that we'd be keen to hear from you about. So one, sort of by way of introduction, Anusha and Yuping shared how each of their offices engage on leveraging AI and data science in support of their mandates, the mandates of their organizations and specific initiatives, and also they shared sort of very specific initiatives and AI solutions that they have been involved in, and that's sort of at the forefront of their work right now. So if you could similarly share from the Tech Envoy's office, and then we've already also ventured in to discussing the Global Digital Compact, and it's based on its recent adoption and how this might guide the work of the UN and partners going forward, and specifically what implications there will be for the future of AI governance. So if you don't mind to share your reflections on these questions, we'd welcome that. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks very much, Sara, and good to see you all. My name is Quentin. I'm from the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Technology. Our office has been supporting the Global Digital Compact process as part of the Secretariat, and also the high-level advisory body on artificial intelligence, which was asked to look at this question of AI governance. So happy to share a few reflections on that over the last year or so. Well, maybe before going into that, because you'd been speaking about how UN organizations themselves are using AI and generative AI. And our office, well, first of all, it's a very small office, but we actually don't really use it that much. And part of the reason for that is the data protection and privacy considerations around some of these large language models, whereby when a query or a prompt is put into the LLM, whether it's ChatGPT or Cloud or whatever, that information is shared with the technology company and basically saved down. And so in the UN, one of the early things our office was involved with was sharing guidance to the UN Secretariat on the use of these tools. And there are a couple of key principles, which is not to disclose confidential information into the tools, because it's basically shared, outside. Once it's typed in. And then secondly, that individuals who do choose to use the tools for non-confidential tasks remain accountable as personnel for the results. So there's no blaming the tool for a mistake or, something that you may have put into the tool and you got something out and then it's a mistake. You as a user remain accountable. So trying to reconcile the need to protect confidential information and also the accountability of human beings in using these tools within the wider Secretariat has resulted in our case, because of the type of work that we do, ending up not using it that much ourselves, which is, of course, we have played with it, but in terms of the actual proper business of the office, it's not particularly ingrained yet. And until the requisite legal agreements are in place between the organization and the provider of the AI tools, we would not expect that to change very much soon. Now, in terms of the role of the office in working on AI as a topic, so this is where it comes to the intergovernmental discussions, and maybe before going to the UN, can step back and think about the wider world and what's happened in the last 18 months or so, which has been obviously an explosion of interest in these technologies pretty much since ChatGPT was released around the end of 2022. In fact, an analysis of the main international, interregional and regional AI governance initiatives tracked that in 2019, there may have been 3 or so key milestones. 2020 with COVID, there weren't that many agreements, none tracked. 2021, 2, 2022, 2 agreements tracked. 2023, after the release of ChatGPT, you had 6 intergovernmental initiatives adopted. And then in the first half of 2024, you had 8. So, you know, just as ChatGPT took off, you also had this kind of explosion in interest. And this is not just, this is, you know, OECD, G20, the G7, several countries have launched AI governance summits. The European Union has its own legal framework, and the Council of Europe treaty, ASEAN, Organization of American States, the African Union. So there's a whole kind of bunch of new governance initiatives which are mushrooming in the last 18 months. And then the UN discussion happens within that wider context. And the UN, we had the first Security Council resolution in relation to AI. We've had 2 General Assembly resolutions specifically on AI, one initiated by the United States, the other initiated by China, both of which were adopted by consensus and actually co-sponsored by the other. You know, the US one was co-sponsored by China and vice versa. And then, of course, we have the Global Digital Compact adopted in September, which was adopted by consensus too, so which contains some provisions on AI governance. So what we've seen is that the UN's kind of response has been in step with the rest of the world in terms of speed. But that itself is quite unusual when we think about the history of technology governance, whether it's electricity or nuclear technologies. Those technologies tended to have, you know, lags of years and decades before governance was put in place. Here we're seeing with the UN, just as in the wider world, a much faster pace. So maybe I'll pause there in case there's kind of follow-up questions, but just wanted to set that wider context in terms of what's happened and maybe then the outlook of what might be to come.
Thank you, Quinton. I wonder if you could say a bit more also about, we were talking about ethical, security, and accountability concerns around AI. These questions, of course, being quite central to the 2 GA resolutions, one that focused more on capacity building, of course, which Yuping has also pointed to the importance of this. And you did talk about sort of in your internal use, but in terms of the outlook for AI governance and how this new framework might help us address these concerns, could you say a bit more about your expectations there, maybe also some of the lessons from the high-level advisory body and their recommendations?
Sure. So maybe a couple of words on security and ethics and then governance generally. So of course, there, you know, one of the I guess one of the benefits of having followed this process is that, you know, you learn things from a lot of people, and especially in the high-level advisory body, people, these experts who are gathered from all over in many different disciplines, were able to share quite a few insights. And one of them is that, you know, the distinction between ethics, regulation, and governance. And, you know, ethics could be thought of as what people ought to do. It's kind of, you know, what people should do, how people should behave. But ethics doesn't guarantee any outcomes in terms of behavior. That's where governance and possibly regulation, which is a form of governance, can come in to ideally induce or compel people to behave ethically. So when we think about ethical frameworks, typically ethics are, you know, soft and not necessarily mandatory, but they are the guidelines for ethical behavior, but don't actually go further than that. And that's where this wider question of governance and different forms of governance can come into play to actually, you know, help induce or help bring about ethical behavior through different policy instruments. And that's where, you know, the confusion between governance and regulation also comes in. I mentioned regulation could be a form of governance. The way governance is often conceived is how to direct and trammel the use of technology broadly. And there are many different policy instruments that can be brought to the table for that, not just regulation, which is one. You can also think about trade policy, taxation policy, subsidies, industrial policy, all kinds of you know, behavioral insights-based nudging approaches. So, there's many different instruments within governance that can help bring about more ethical use of AI and more secure use of AI. And so that's where a lot of the governance discussion has been around what kind of approaches ought to be, applied to take it from the ethical to the action and actual, results of trammeling and directing the use of the technology. So I think where the high-level advisory body on AI was able to help was to answer some of this question around how can AI be governed internationally and actually globally for those ends to promote development and also contain risks. And it's answered part of the question, I say, because international doesn't necessarily mean global. There's lots of international frameworks which happen at the sub-global level, regional or cross-regional. But the advisory body felt that the AI as a global technology, there are some reasons why it is helpful or important to have a global approach, both on the risk side and on the spreading the benefits side. So whether that's keeping a watch on risks and how AI is evolving, whether it's which could emerge in any jurisdiction. So just as there are tax havens, there could be AI havens where there's no oversight or where AI is allowed to be applied unethically and dangerously for others, and that could then spill over to other countries. That's one reason to have a global approach. Also, it can be more efficient because if you have many different efforts which are aiming at the same thing, you're basically duplicating resources across it. For example, on scientific analysis of AI, if there are multiple initiatives trying to do that, it becomes duplicative and a waste of resources. So it's actually going to be more efficient to do it at a global level. And of course, when spreading the benefits, there's the digital divide, connectivity divide, and now layered on top of that, also an AI divide. And so to be able to share those benefits more broadly and help those who don't have as much access to either connectivity or AI development, a global approach can also be helpful. And so, you may have heard some of the results of the advisory body, but happy to explain more about some of the specifics. But they were able to source some of the frontier thinking on this topic, not just amongst themselves, because there were 39 experts from 33 countries or regions, many different multidisciplinary, many different kind of expert backgrounds, but also they engaged very widely and broadly. So they had consultations, I think more than 100 in all regions. They engaged over 2,000 other experts through various channels. And through that, in a relatively short period of time, we're able to concentrate some expertise into the answering this question of how AI could or ought to be governed internationally or globally. And of course, with the Global Digital Compact, we see some of the similar ideas echoed. So the proposal to have an international scientific panel on AI looking at AI's capabilities, risks, and opportunities, that's something that was proposed by the advisory body, and the member states also adopted in the GDC, committed to establishing such a panel. Similarly, having a global dialogue on AI governance, intergovernmental and multi-stakeholder, was the proposal from the advisory body. That's also being thought about in the member state context with the GDC. That's also been committed to. And the GDC also requests the Secretary General to propose innovative financing options for capacity building on AI, which is to kind of sharing the benefits. So we see some of the expertise that was sourced in through this process echoed in the Global Digital Compact. And maybe then to the question of how diplomats and foreign ministries can engage in the next phase, because some of the details of the AI scientific panel, the dialogue, and the fund are still open. And the GDC, as an intergovernmental decision, retains the governmental prerogative over the answers to those questions. There's now going to be follow-on processes defining the terms of reference and modalities for an international scientific panel on AI, a global dialogue on AI governance. And of course, the Secretary General's proposals of options on innovative financing would go again to the General Assembly. So there's lots of opportunities to engage in the coming months on, taking the high-level commitments of the Global Digital Compact on global AI governance and translating them into, concrete next steps.
Thank you, Quentin. And you actually preempted my last and concluding question before we open up. I know there are also some questions in the chat, so maybe I'll hand over to Anusha and Yuping in terms of, the audience today includes a lot of representatives from ministries of foreign affairs, from permanent missions, and I think they're keenly listening as to how they can engage indeed with this evolving role on AI that is happening at the UN. And what specific opportunities exist for them to contribute to and influence these AI-related trends, discussions, and initiatives. So thank you, Quentin, for sharing the perspective of the UN Tech Envoy's office. Yuping, do you want to take over from here? And then Anusha, and then I'm aware of the time. We do want to have some questions also from the audience, so maybe 1 to 2 minutes each. Thank you.
Just very quickly, we very much welcome any engagement around the AI for sustainable development space that we've been active in, and also some feedback, I think, on the work that we're leading out with other UN agencies like UNESCO and ITU on AI capacity building, and really, again, thinking about how to leverage AI responsibly for achievement of the SDGs and to support development outcomes in our program countries. So feel free to reach out to me here in New York. We'll also be doing, I think, quite a number of events with partners like the BMZ and other government partners around, for instance, Canada's EcoSoc presidency, the Paris AI Action Summit next year, the Hamburg Sustainability Conference, as I've already mentioned, GPay possibly as well, the summit in Serbia. So really do reach out to me if you're interested in engaging a little bit more with UNDP's work on AI for development.
Thank you, Yuping. Anusha, over to you.
Thank you, Sara, and thank you, Yuping. From our perspective, we don't directly engage with the permanent missions and the member states, but we do welcome any feedback and sort of, inputs that we can take the guidance when it comes to common risks and mitigations, when it comes to using AI products and services, and how do we want to collaborate to make sure that, this knowledge is something that we can build upon with not only within the UN system, and also how we can share it from a responsible use of AI beyond the UN system also. So that is something that we can take all the help we can get.
Thank you. And I know we have some questions in the chat. Will the conveners take over from here? Otherwise, I'm going to look in the chat if I can. Sorry, I'm on my phone. Okay. So we have 2 questions. I'll perhaps allow you to answer them as you wish. So just come in. One is, how will UN documents on AI benefit the Global South countries in terms of AI governance? And the second is, what are best AI governance models introduced to Global South to apply in order to implement the SDG goals? They're maybe a bit related. So basically, how can AI benefit Global South in terms of through AI governance, I suppose. And then I just also see a comment about welcoming the distinction between ethics and governance. But I don't know, Yuping, do you want to talk a bit about this? You've talked a lot about the Global South and the importance of this. And then maybe also, Quentin, in terms of what you're seeing with your engagement with member states, how they see these 2 GA resolutions and also the GDC impacting both the discussion and the real impact in the Global South.
Maybe I could speak a little bit about some of that in the context of the GDC. And one of the major findings from the AI advisory body was the extent to which Global South countries were actually not engaged or involved or included in the AI governance conversations that have been happening internationally. And I spoke about, this massive uptick in AI governance fora, discussions, conferences, summits, etc. And one of the findings is that if you look at the 7 prominent examples of those AI governance initiatives, whether it's the OECD, G7, G20, GPay, the Bletchley Park AI Summit, the Korea Seoul AI Summit, out of those 7 or so initiatives, 7 countries were in all of them, and it coincidentally was actually the G7 countries that were in every one of those 7 initiatives, but 118 countries were engaged in none of them. And those 118 countries were predominantly in the global south. So the advisory body framed this as what they were calling a representation gap in the international governance architecture. And of course, one of the principles that some countries think of when it comes to international issues is, nothing about us without us. And because AI is a global technology and spreads across borders and will be impacting many people, is already impacting many people. There was a survey recently that I think 1 in 3 Americans are using AI every day. And this is just the start, and spreading around the world, that AI will impact people and will, be integrated into industries that will impact people's jobs and people's lives. Yet 118 countries were not represented in any of these 7 prominent examples. So I think one of the major starting points is to have global representation. And that's why the Global Digital Compact, which was agreed by all 193 UN member states, was a big step forward to having global representation in the AI governance conversations. And some of the decisions on AI governance that came out of that more global perspective are different from what was coming out of, or what is coming out of, the other processes. So, for example, on the Analysis International Scientific Panel on AI, one of the big differences between that panel, as per the GDC, and existing efforts, which, for example, the UK government has led State of the Science report on artificial intelligence, is that the UK government's efforts was very narrowly focused on frontier AI and safety only, whereas the UN panel would be focused not just on safety, but also on opportunities, which is one of the areas that some countries in the global south are more interested in, and how those opportunities can be scaled out. So that's just one example of how representation is an end in its own right, but it also results in different outcomes in terms of decisions and institutions. We can say similar things about the financing for AI capacity building, and how, without a global approach, there are, of course, many efforts in capacity building, and Yuping would have spoken about many of them, and many governments also launching their own. But without a global approach, there risks being a fragmented capacity building landscape where countries are not listened to in terms of the capacity that they need. They're getting parachuted in capacity, and they're getting overcapacitated without being listened to. And so one of the questions around the innovative financing for capacity building is, how can it be more demands led from the countries who are receiving the capacity, and how can it be coherent and interoperable, so that countries can receive capacity development from various sources in a cumulative and integrated and way that builds their country in a way that doesn't force them to choose between different, let's say, capacity paradigms, but rather enables them to crowd in more capacity from different sources in an interoperable way. So it's quite abstract, but I think the point is that without representation, the perspectives of the global south would not be involved in the conversation. That would show up in the outcomes.
Thank you, Quentin. And I see more questions coming up now. I'm mindful of the time here. So maybe just to say that those questions about innovative financing, I think Quentin spoke to that, but also if you want to say anything about that, Yuping or Anusha in your answers around achieving the SDGs and capacity building. And otherwise, there is a question on sort of what substance will or should be the main topic going forward in AI governance. And I think sort of based on Quentin's answer also now, we'll in a way have to see, right? There is sort of a discussion on AI safety indeed, and these many AI safety institutes that are popping up, as it were, in a number of countries, but there'll also be this global dialogue and indeed the scientific panel that will, give us, I suppose, some of these answers going forward. So just encouraging everyone to follow these initiatives. But over to you, Yuping and Anusha, with any concluding thoughts based on these questions.
Very quickly, I just want to pick up what Quentin was saying, that it really needs to be a very thoughtful approach in individual countries. It's really not one size fits all from the global level, and it's really about listening to the local ecosystem, stakeholders, and having a sense of what will be impactful in that particular context. And so that's where UNDP, I think, with our presence in the 170 countries, the fact that we've been with national governments and stakeholders for over 50, 60 years, and really have guided very much a lot of their developmental work, really is best placed to really think about some of these conversations. That's why this has actually been the focus of a lot of our work on AI in terms of capacity building, in terms of what Quentin was saying, crowding in of different sources to really try and populate that digital development trajectory of a country itself. That's why, for instance, we embed our AI work in the work that we do around digital public infrastructure, around, for instance, digital transformation, where we have, for instance, the approach towards governance of digital technologies more generally is one that is based on how do you make these types of right developmental choices enforced by safeguards, for instance. So that's why we have a DPI safeguards work that actually is applicable in some sense to AI and other emerging technologies as well. And that if we're looking at financing, for instance, we're looking at a partnership with the World Bank to really look at how at the country level, these digital transformation national strategies can then be resourced in creative ways by financing institutions or development banks and so forth. So we are really sort of sitting at the heart of a lot of this future work of the UN system when it comes to AI and capacity building through our partnerships with other UN entities and the broader development ecosystem. And really, I think it kind of connects with what I originally said, that AI governance, if you think about what it means for developing countries and development trajectories, has to be very consciously part of the entire development nexus and part of this conversation with stakeholders and other communities as well.
Thank you. Very clear. And over to you, Anusha. Any last concluding remarks to answer some of the questions in the chat?
I'm slowly looking at some of the questions to respond to them. From our perspective, making sure that we are bringing all this together from a responsible use of AI is what we are focused on, and we want to make sure that, the recommendations that comes in from the GDC and the Global Governance AI Framework, this is something that we are looking at. How do we want to develop it, and how do we want to adopt to it? That is the status from our side. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And with this, let me just express a sincere thanks to Anusha, Quentin, and Yuping for a great discussion today. As you can hear, there are plenty of opportunities to engage going forward, and also do stay tuned of these new tracks that will indeed emerge as a follow-up to the GDC, and again, UN agencies also continue to engage very directly and specifically in these spaces. So thanks again, and also thanks to the organizers for having us today.